The portal's shimmering light faded as Jade, Claire, Mallory, Cody, and Valerie stepped onto a dirt road, surrounded by towering trees. The dense forest closed in around them, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The sounds of distant birds echoed through the woods, but otherwise, there was an eerie stillness. Jade looked around, taking in their surroundings. It's quiet here. Too quiet. Claire moved closer to him, her eyes scanning the tree line. Where do you think we are? I'm not sure. Jade replied, squinting down the road, trying to get a sense of direction. But we're close. I can feel it. Valerie stood a few feet away, staring into the forest. Feels like something's watching us. Mallory snorted, his arms crossed. Wouldn't be surprised. The hooded man always seems to know where we are. Cody stayed quiet, his gaze distant, clearly deep in thought. Jade noticed the look on his son's face, but decided not to push just yet. As the family gathered on the road, Jade took a deep breath, knowing he needed to address the looming tension. Before we go any further, there's something I need to say. They all turned toward him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. Jade's voice was firm but calm. When we face the hooded man, we have to stop him, there's no question about that. But there will be no killing. Mallory raised an eyebrow, his disbelief clear. No killing? Jade, we're talking about the hooded man here. He's not going to give us the option of playing nice. Claire looked at Jade, a mix of concern and confusion on her face. He's dangerous, Jade. If we don't stop him permanently, he could come back. Valerie, arms crossed, chimed in. He's destroyed countless lives. You really think we can stop him without ending this for good? Jade held his ground, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. I know how dangerous he is. I know what he's done. But we're not like him. If we kill him, we're no better than he is. Mallory scoffed, frustration evident. That's idealistic, Jade. What happens when he tries to manipulate us again? When he comes after us or worse, someone we care about? There was a tense silence as they all considered Jade's words. Everyone, except Cody, seemed ready to argue further. Cody, who had remained quiet, finally spoke, his voice soft but filled with a weight of experience. Dad's right. Mallory and Valerie turned to look at him, clearly surprised. What? Valerie asked. Cody glanced down the dirt road, his mind wandering to the parallel universe he had been trapped in for 5 long years. He could see the face of the other Jade, the one who had refused to take lives, even when everything had been stacked against him. I spent 5 years in another world. Cody began, his voice steady but reflective. The Jade of that universe was like Dad in a lot of ways, but he was harder. He fought battles, led armies, but he never killed anyone. He always believed there was another way. And it worked. Jade turned toward Cody, surprised, but also proud to hear this. He did? Cody nodded, meeting his father's gaze. Yeah. He always found a way to win without taking lives. And I think you're right, Dad. If we kill the hooded man, we become like him. There's always a better option. Valerie looked torn, her brow furrowed as she processed Cody's words. But, what if there isn't? There will be. Jade said confidently. We'll find it. Claire sighed softly, still uncertain but trusting her husband's judgment. Okay, Jade. We'll try it your way. But if things go south, we'll handle it. Jade reassured her, squeezing her hand. Together. Mallory remained silent for a moment, clearly struggling with the idea. But after a long pause, he finally nodded, though his face remained skeptical. Fine. We'll do it your way. But I'm not making any promises if things get out of hand. Jade gave a small, grateful smile. That's all I ask. With their agreement made, the family turned and started walking up the dirt road, the forest thickening around them. For a long time, the only sounds were the crunching of leaves and twigs underfoot and the distant calls of wildlife. After what felt like hours of walking, the trees finally began to thin, and the road opened up. Ahead of them, perched on a distant hill, was a dark, imposing structure, a castle. Its tall spires pierced the sky, shrouded in mist, with crumbling towers and jagged battlements. The sight of it sent a chill through the air. "There it is," Valerie said quietly. "The hooded man's stronghold." Cody squinted at the castle, a frown forming on his face. "It's bigger than I thought." Mallory crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing as he studied the distant structure. "And a lot more fortified. We're about a day away." Claire observed, her gaze fixed on the dark castle in the distance. Jade nodded, his expression grim. "We'll make camp tonight and head for the castle at first light. We need to be rested and ready." As they continued walking, their conversations turned to strategy, but there was a lingering tension in the air. Valerie glanced at Mallory. "What do you think the hooded man's planning in that place?" Mallory shook his head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not good. He's probably been preparing for us. He's always been one step ahead." Claire added, her voice filled with concern. "But this time, we have the upper hand. We've trained for this." Cody walked beside Valerie, deep in thought. "I just keep thinking about the other universe. And how much I learned there. If it wasn't for that, I don't know if I'd feel ready for this." Valerie nudged him gently. "You're ready, Cody. We all are." As night began to fall, they found a clearing just off the road, surrounded by tall trees. The canopy above blocked most of the sky, leaving them in a dim, quiet space. "This'll do," Jade said, setting down his pack. They quickly set up camp, gathering wood for a fire. Soon, the soft glow of the flames lit their faces as they sat around the fire, the castle looming in the distance like a dark promise. Jade looked around at his family, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we face the hooded man. Together." They all nodded in agreement, though the weight of the coming battle hung over them. One by one, they settled into their sleeping bags, their minds racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the night as they prepared for what would be their final confrontation. And there, in the quiet of the forest, the Wells family waited, united and ready for whatever came next. As everyone began to relax around the campfire, the tension of the day slowly easing away, Valerie sat down beside her father, Jade. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows on their faces. "Hey, Dad," Valerie said, her voice quiet yet thoughtful. Jade glanced at her, smiling softly. "Hey, Val. Everything all right?" She shrugged, leaning back a bit, her gaze drifting into the flames. "I was just thinking about everything that's happened, how far we've come." She paused, then added, "Do you remember when we thought it was all over? After we closed the portal?" Jade's smile faded slightly as the memories resurfaced. "Yeah, I remember. We thought we could finally go back to living a normal life." Valerie nodded. "I can't stop thinking about that night. When the Sentinel came back. It felt like no matter what we did, the future wouldn't leave us alone." Jade's expression grew serious. "Yeah, I remember that night all too well." Flashback, his memory surged back, clear as if it had happened only moments ago. Weeks had passed since the portal had been sealed, and life had begun to settle into a strange new normal for the Wells family. Jade, Claire, and Valerie were trying to reclaim a sense of ordinary life. Jade had thrown himself back into work, while Valerie and Claire tried to focus on their day-to-day routines. But beneath the quiet of their world, an undercurrent of unease lingered. One evening, as the sun began to set, Valerie sat by her bedroom window, staring up at the stars. There was a heaviness in her chest, a feeling that everything wasn't as resolved as they had hoped. Claire entered the room and quietly sat beside her daughter. "You've been quiet lately," Claire said softly, her gaze filled with concern. Valerie sighed, her mind swirling with questions. "I can't stop thinking about the future, Mom. We closed the portal, but what if they come back? What if we missed something?" Claire squeezed her hand gently. "We did everything we could. You brought your father home. We're safe now." Valerie nodded, though the feeling of unease persisted. Suddenly, there was a loud crack from the backyard, a sound that sent a jolt through both of them. Claire jumped up, her face pale with fear. "What was that?" she whispered. Valerie rushed to the window. The backyard appeared still at first, but then her sharp eyes caught something, a faint shimmer in the air, like the distortion from heat waves. Her stomach dropped. "I knew it," she whispered. Claire followed her daughter's gaze, her face paling even more. "Is that?" Before she could finish, a figure emerged from the shimmering distortion. At first, it was barely visible, but as it stepped forward, its form solidified. The figure was tall, metallic, with a humanoid shape, but its smooth mask and glowing blue eyes were anything but human. "They found us," Valerie whispered, her heart racing. Claire grabbed her arm. "We need to get your father." But Valerie shook her head. "No. I'll go. I know what they want." Ignoring her mother's protests, Valerie ran downstairs and threw open the door, stepping into the cool night air. The metallic figure stopped at the edge of the yard, its glowing eyes locking onto her. "What do you want?" Valerie called, her voice trembling slightly but filled with resolve. The figure tilted its head, studying her, before speaking in a voice that was both mechanical and otherworldly. "You disrupted the flow of time. The balance must be restored." Valerie's breath hitched. "We closed the portal. You have no right to be here." The figure took a step forward, the ground beneath it humming with energy. The portal was one connection. Time has many threads. We are not bound by one. Fear gripped her, but Valerie stood her ground. "What do you want from us?" The figure paused, its glowing eyes flickering. "Your father's knowledge. His experiments destabilized the timeline. The damage he caused must be repaired." Valerie's heart pounded. Her father's work, which had been her way of bringing him home, had caused deeper consequences than any of them realized. "You're not taking him," she said firmly, though her voice shook. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised its hand, and a shimmering wave of energy shot out toward her. Valerie braced herself for impact, but just before the energy struck, a barrier of light appeared in front of her, absorbing the attack. Startled, she turned to see Jade standing in the doorway, his hand raised, controlling the barrier. "Leave my daughter out of this," Jade said, his voice calm but cold. The metallic figure paused, lowering its hand. "Your knowledge caused this fracture, Jade Wells. You alone can fix it." Jade stepped forward, his hand still outstretched, keeping the light barrier between Valerie and the Sentinel. "I'll fix it. But not on your terms." The figure stood still for a moment, its eyes glowing brighter. "You have one cycle," it said. "One chance to restore the balance. If you fail, we will return." And with that, the figure vanished, dissolving into the same shimmering distortion it had come from. End of flashback. Jade's voice dropped to a whisper, pulling himself back to the present. Valerie shook her head, still awed by the memory. "You stopped that energy bolt, Dad. I've never seen you do anything like that before." Jade nodded slowly, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Neither had I. It was like something inside me just clicked." Valerie tilted her head, studying her father. "Do you think it was your Kismet powers? Even though we didn't know you were a Kismet back then?" Jade took a deep breath, thinking back to that night. "Maybe. It felt like instinct. Like the power was always there, waiting for the right moment to come out. Valerie smiled softly, her admiration for her father evident. I guess we didn't know back then, but now it makes sense. You've always had it in you. Jade chuckled lightly, shaking his head. Yeah, I guess so. I just didn't realize it at the time. They sat together in silence for a while, the warmth of the fire keeping the cool night air at bay. Eventually, Jade glanced around at the others, who were settling down for the night. Get some sleep, Val. Jade said gently. We've got a big day ahead. Valerie nodded, giving her father a small smile. Good night, Dad. Good night, Val. Jade replied, watching her for a moment before settling down himself. As the night deepened, the campfire crackled softly, and the Wells family drifted off to sleep, their thoughts heavy with the challenges that awaited them. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit halls of the hooded man's castle, the atmosphere was heavy, a tension in the air that spoke of plans unfolding. The stone walls echoed with faint whispers, the torches casting just enough light to give the place a shadowy, mysterious feel. At the far end of the room, the hooded man stood in his dark cloak, his face hidden beneath a hood. His glowing eyes gleamed faintly from within, watching, waiting. One by one, they arrived, summoned to the castle as part of a larger scheme. Each figure stepped forward into the dim light, unsure of why they had been called but knowing that the hooded man did not make idle requests. First came the woman with silver eyes that shimmered in the firelight. She stepped forward, her posture graceful yet alert. You called for me, she said, her voice soft but sharp, cutting through the stillness. The hooded man's eyes shifted towards her. I have need of you. Sit. She took her place, watching him with a wary curiosity. The silence was only momentary as the next to enter was the broad-shouldered man, a grin playing on his lips even as his eyes took in the room. He gave a short nod to the woman before addressing the hooded man. What's this about? Something big, I hope. The hooded man did not respond immediately, only motioning for him to take a seat. The man's grin faded just slightly as he complied, sensing the weight of the moment. Next, the gaunt man entered, his hollow eyes flicking around the room, taking in the details like a predator surveying its prey. His bony fingers twitched as he sat down silently, his gaze never leaving the hooded man. Finally, the largest of them entered, his presence alone seeming to fill the room. The towering man moved with purpose, his armor clinking lightly as he took his place without a word. Once they were all seated, the hooded man stepped forward, his voice low and firm, filled with the gravity of what he was about to say. I called you here because the Wells family is coming. That caught their attention immediately. The woman leaned forward slightly, her silver eyes narrowing. So they've found you, have they? The broad-shouldered man snorted, crossing his arms. Finally grew a backbone, did they? The hooded man's eyes gleamed beneath his hood. They are stronger than before. They have united against me and have been training, preparing for this moment. I cannot afford to take them lightly. The gaunt man spoke up, his voice like a hiss. And what do you expect us to do about it? The hooded man glanced around at each of them in turn. You owe me. I collected you, one by one, when you were at your lowest. And now, I ask you to repay that debt. The Wells family must be stopped. The room grew colder as the weight of his words settled over them. The broad-shouldered man chuckled darkly. You're saying we take them out? No problem. They won't know what hit them. The hooded man's voice was calm but filled with an underlying menace. They've come far. Don't underestimate them. Each one of them poses a threat, and together, they are dangerous. The woman with silver eyes smirked. And you're worried they'll stop you? The hooded man stepped closer to the table, his voice lowering to a near whisper, though it carried through the room. They won't stop me, because you won't let them. The gaunt man leaned forward, his bony fingers tapping the table. What's in it for us? The hooded man's eyes glowed brighter for a moment, a faint sense of amusement in his voice. Your freedom. Once they're dealt with, you will no longer be tied to me. Your debt will be repaid, and you'll be free to go your own way. But fail me, and there will be consequences. The towering man spoke for the first time, his deep voice resonating through the hall. You make it sound like they're worth fearing. They are. The hooded man said simply. But you will not fail. Together, you will stop them before they can reach me. Do what you must. Eliminate them. Silence followed, each of the four figures absorbing the hooded man's words. They exchanged glances, knowing that there was no turning back now. They owed him, and he had come to collect. The woman finally broke the silence. Very well. We'll stop them. The hooded man nodded, his satisfaction almost palpable. Good. Prepare yourselves. The Wells family is nearly here, and when they arrive, you will strike. With that, the hooded man turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the castle, leaving the four figures to prepare for the confrontation to come. They knew what was expected of them, and though the task was dangerous, they had no choice but to see it through. As the hooded man's presence faded from the room, the four figures exchanged words in hushed tones, discussing strategies, wondering just how powerful the Wells family had become. The morning sun was just beginning to rise when the Wells family stirred from their makeshift camp in the forest. The fire had died down hours ago, leaving only faint embers and a thin trail of smoke that mixed with the crisp morning air. As they packed their belongings, the tension of the upcoming confrontation weighed heavily on all of them. Jade was the first to speak as they prepared to move. Today, we face him. The hooded man is expecting us, but we don't go in with the intention to kill. We're going to stop him, but we don't cross that line. His words hung in the air for a moment, and though there was still a flicker of doubt in Mallory's eyes, no one argued. Cody looked thoughtful, clearly thinking back to his time in the parallel universe where the other Jade had a similar belief, while Valerie remained focused, her determination evident in her posture. Claire stood by her husband's side, the quiet strength she always carried visible in her gaze. They set off down the dirt road once more, their pace quicker as they knew the castle wasn't far now. The forest began to thin, and soon enough, the dense trees gave way to a vast open area. There, rising before them like a dark sentinel, was the hooded man's castle. It was everything they expected, and worse. The castle stood tall and imposing, its dark stone walls jagged and weathered from centuries of existence. Towering spires reached up toward the sky, casting long, ominous shadows over the land below. Vines, twisted and overgrown, snaked up the sides of the fortress, and the air around it felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was charged with malevolent energy. The family stopped a few paces from the base of the castle, taking in the full scope of the dark fortress. Claire was the first to break the silence, her voice quiet but filled with awe. It's even worse than I imagined. Valerie nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the foreboding structure. It looks like something from a nightmare. Mallory, ever blunt, crossed his arms and tilted his head as he stared up at the towering spires. This place is practically screaming danger. We don't know what's waiting for us inside. Cody, always the pragmatic one, scanned the perimeter of the castle. It's fortified. We'll need to be careful. There's no telling what kind of traps or defenses he's set up. Jade, standing slightly ahead of the others, stared at the entrance, his face set with grim determination. We're walking into unknown territory, but we've prepared for this. We're not here to destroy, our goal is to stop him from causing any more damage. We stick together, and we don't take unnecessary risks. Valerie spoke up, glancing at the others. So what's the plan once we're inside? We know he'll be expecting us. Jade turned to face them, his brow furrowed in thought. We need to stay focused. The hooded man has been pulling the strings for too long, manipulating events, and causing chaos. But we have one advantage: he doesn't know exactly what we're capable of now. We use that to our benefit. Mallory shifted uneasily. And if things go sideways? If he brings the fight to us? We handle it, Jade replied firmly. We've trained for this. But remember, we fight smart. We're not looking to escalate unless we have no other choice. If we can disable his power, we do that first. Cody crossed his arms, his voice calm but serious. We need to stay alert. He's dangerous, and if there are others with him, they won't be easy to deal with. Unbeknownst to them, the hooded man had already gathered his own forces, and they were waiting inside. The 4 individuals he had summoned would be ready for the Wells family, though their intentions remained hidden for now. The family stood in front of the castle for a few more moments, the weight of what lay ahead settling in. The castle's dark presence loomed over them, casting a long shadow that seemed to stretch out toward them, as if the very building itself knew the conflict that was about to unfold. Finally, Jade turned to his family. Let's go. Stay together, stay focused, and remember, we're not alone in this. We're in this as a family. With that, they moved forward, stepping toward the dark fortress that awaited them. The entrance to the castle stood wide open, a silent invitation to the battle that was sure to come. They didn't know what awaited them inside, but they were ready to face it, together. Inside the dimly lit, echoing halls of the hooded man's castle, the 4 individuals summoned to aid in his cause gathered in the Great Hall of Time. The atmosphere was heavy, the air thick with the ancient, eerie energy of the chamber. Glowing hourglasses lined the walls, their sands shifting and swirling with an unnatural rhythm, a constant reminder of the power that flowed through the room. The tall woman with mercury-like eyes stood near the entrance, her sharp gaze scanning the room. She spoke first, her voice calm but carrying a dangerous edge. The Wells family is getting closer. They've made it past the castle's outer defenses. But they won't reach the hooded man. Not here. Not in the Great Hall. The gaunt man with hollow eyes stepped forward, his skeletal fingers twitching as he surveyed the room. They're more powerful than we anticipated. But they are still fractured. If we can isolate them, exploit their weaknesses, we can break them. The muscular man leaned against a pillar, a dark grin on his face. Forget breaking them. We'll crush them here, in this hall. This is our domain. They won't leave this place in one piece. The final figure, cloaked in shadows, spoke with a chilling certainty that settled over the group. We have to stop them before they reach the hooded man. If they do, it's over. This is our last chance. The mercury-eyed woman stepped away from the entrance, her expression cold and resolute. Then we strike here, in the heart of the castle. We use the hall to our advantage. The time energy here will amplify our power. We'll trap them, wear them down, and finish this before they even get a glimpse of the hooded man. The gaunt man grinned, the shadows deepening around him. This hall bends time itself. We control it. They won't even see us coming. The muscular man cracked his knuckles, his grin widening. Good. Let's give them a proper welcome. As the 4 figures stood in the ominous glow of the hourglasses, their plan solidified. The Wells family was about to enter the most dangerous part of the castle, and the hooded man's most formidable allies were ready to strike. The Great Hall of Time, with its shifting energies and unpredictable flow of moments, would be their battlefield. Here, they would ensure that the Wells family would not take another step toward the hooded man. The trap was set, and time itself would be their weapon. Inside the looming shadow of the castle, the Wells family approached cautiously. The walls of the fortress stretched high above them, jagged and ancient, their dark stones slit with the mist that swirled in the cold air. Jade led the way, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, ever alert. The heavy wooden doors groaned open as they entered, the air within even colder and filled with an unnatural stillness. Every step echoed in the castle's vast corridors, as though the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Jade glanced over his shoulder at Claire, Valerie, Cody, and Mallory. They all wore similar expressions of determination mixed with apprehension. There was no turning back now. "This place, it feels wrong," Valerie murmured as she walked just behind her father, her fingers brushing the hilt of her weapon, her senses tingling from the oppressive atmosphere around them. Cody nodded, walking beside her, his eyes darting to every shadow. "It's like time itself is twisted here. I can feel it, something's off." Claire, keeping close to Jade's side, looked up at the towering stone arches. "It's like the air is heavier in here. We're close, aren't we?" To him? Jade's expression hardened as he stared down the long hallway before them. "We are. The hooded man is waiting for us in the Great Hall of Time. That's where this will all end." Mallory, bringing up the rear, stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Do you really think we're ready? After all this time, after all we've been through, he still feels like he's 2 steps ahead of us." Jade paused for a moment, turning to look at his brother. "We have to be. We've trained, we've learned. We've come too far to turn back now. Whatever happens in that hall, we face it together." Valerie clenched her fists, determination settling in her features. "We've beaten the odds before. We can do it again. He's caused enough damage, and we're here to stop it." Cody remained quiet, his mind briefly flashing back to his time in the parallel universe, where another version of his father had expressed the same resolve. He knew the fight ahead would test all of them. As they continued deeper into the castle, the walls seemed to close in around them. The hallways twisted and turned, leading them further into the heart of the fortress. The strange symbols etched into the stone seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive with ancient magic, making the tension within the group rise. "The closer we get, the more it feels like time is slipping," Claire whispered, her voice echoing faintly. "Like reality is thinning." Jade's voice was grim. "That's because it is. This place, it's not just a castle. The hooded man has used time itself to shape it, to control it. The Great Hall of Time, that's where he bends the fabric of reality. It's where he's most powerful." Valerie stopped for a moment, staring ahead. "So, once we step inside, it's his game, isn't it?" Jade nodded, his gaze fixed forward. "Yes, but that doesn't mean we can't beat him." Mallory cracked his knuckles, his face hardening with resolve. "Then let's finish this." They continued their march through the eerie corridors, the sound of their footsteps now the only thing echoing through the oppressive silence. Finally, they reached the massive double doors that marked the entrance to the Great Hall of Time. The ancient wood was covered in swirling symbols, faintly glowing as if they were breathing in time with the castle itself. The Wells family stood in front of the doors, their hearts pounding, knowing that once they stepped through, there would be no turning back. Jade looked at each of them in turn. "Once we go inside, everything changes. Stay together. We don't know what we're walking into, but we do know one thing. The hooded man is in there, and this is where we stop him." Valerie, her hand resting on her weapon, nodded firmly. "We're ready." Cody stepped forward, his expression steady. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Mallory, standing next to Jade, glanced at the doors, then at his brother. "We've come this far. Let's end it." Jade took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Then, with one last look at his family, he reached for the doors of the Great Hall of Time. But before they could enter, an unsettling shift in the air passed through them, as if time itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final confrontation. And they all knew, this was it. The battle was about to begin. In the ethereal glow of the Kismet realm, Yemelith stood at the edge of a shimmering pool, her heart clenched as she watched her sons, Jade and Mallory, moving closer to the hooded man's fortress. The weight of the moment crushed her, she could feel the growing tension in her sons, their fear buried beneath determination. They needed help, more than she could give from here. Footsteps echoed behind her, steady and deliberate. Yemelith didn't turn right away, already knowing who it was. The presence carried a familiar authority that always filled her with a mix of comfort and tension. Yemelith. A deep voice called softly. How are they? She turned to face Lorien, a time guardian, his tall, imposing figure standing in the soft light of the Kismet realm. His expression was one of concern, though he kept his emotions tightly controlled. His silver eyes, however, betrayed a hint of the turmoil he tried to conceal. They need more help, Yemelith said, her voice tight with worry. The hooded man isn't alone, he's gathered 4 powerful allies. Jade and Mallory and my grandchildren can't face him on their own. Lorien's brow furrowed as he sighed deeply, his voice a measured calm. You know we are forbidden to interfere directly, Yemelith. The Time Guardians must remain neutral. This is a law as old as time itself. Yemelith's eyes flared with a mix of frustration and desperation, her voice rising with emotion. I won't stand by and watch my sons die, Lorien. Jade and Mallory are your sons too. Not to mention your grandchildren. How can you talk about laws when their lives are hanging by a thread? The words hung in the air, the tension between them palpable. Yemelith's heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she held Lorien's gaze, searching for any sign of the man she once loved. His face softened, his stoic demeanor cracking under the weight of the truth she had laid bare. I know, Yemelith. Lorien finally said, his voice quiet, laced with regret. I feel it too. They are my sons, and it tears at me that I cannot help them. But the Time Guardians, we cannot interfere with the balance of time. Yemelith's face hardened, her frustration boiling over. Balance? What balance is there when the hooded man bends time to his will? He has broken every law you swore to protect. We're supposed to stand by and let him destroy everything, while our children fight alone? Lorien remained silent for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He turned his gaze away from her, staring into the shimmering expanse of the Kismet realm. The conflict within him was clear, the battle between duty and his heart raging inside. After what felt like an eternity, Lorien spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. There may be a way. Yemelith's heart skipped a beat, hope flaring in her chest. What is it? She asked, stepping closer to him, her desperation clear. Lorien turned back to her, his eyes filled with both determination and caution. There are 2 individuals, outside the reach of the Time Guardians, outside the rules of this realm. They have no connection to this Kismet realm, but they may have the power to help. Yemelith's eyes widened, her voice urgent. Then go. Bring them here. Lorien hesitated, his face clouded with uncertainty. They are unpredictable, Yemelith. Their motives aren't always clear. They may help, but their aid may come at a price. And once they're involved, the situation may spiral beyond our control. I don't care. Yemelith snapped, her eyes fierce with resolve. I won't let my sons face the hooded man alone. Whatever the cost, we'll face it. But I will not lose them again. Lorien studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly, his expression grim but resolved. Very well. He said, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. I'll bring them. Without another word, Lorien's form began to shimmer, dissolving into the light of the Kismet realm. As he vanished, Yemelith stood alone once more, her gaze fixed on the pool before her, where her sons continued their perilous journey. Hold on. She whispered softly. Help is coming. And for the first time in what felt like hours, Yemelith allowed herself a fragile glimmer of hope. The heavy doors of the Great Hall of Time groaned as Jade pushed them open, the Wells family stepping into the vast, ominous chamber. The room was colossal, its ceiling lost in the shadows above, and hourglasses of every size lined the walls, their sands shifting unnaturally, suspended in time. A palpable energy filled the air, warping reality itself, and in the center of the room stood 4 figures, the hooded man's allies, waiting like predators in the dark. Jade's eyes swept the room, searching for their true enemy, but the hooded man was nowhere to be seen. Instead, these four dangerous beings stood before them, each exuding a sinister aura. He quickly assessed the situation, his heart pounding in his chest. "Claire, behind that pillar, now." Jade barked, motioning toward a large stone column to their left. His voice was steady, but beneath it was an edge of urgency. Claire didn't argue, ducking behind the pillar for cover, her heart racing. The tallest of the hooded man's allies, a man with rippling muscles and dark armor, cracked his knuckles with a slow, deliberate grin. "So this is the famous Wells family," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "Not so impressive up close." Valerie stepped forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You're not going to stop us. We're taking the hooded man down, and you're not getting in our way." A woman with silver, mercury-like eyes took a graceful step forward, her smile cruel. "You really believe that? You have no idea what you've stepped into. This hall is our domain. Here, time bends to us. Your little family doesn't stand a chance." Mallory, his jaw clenched, crossed his arms and muttered under his breath. "We've dealt with worse." Cody remained silent, his eyes locked onto the four figures, sensing the sheer power radiating off them. He could feel the tension rising, the inevitable conflict hanging by a thread. His mind flashed back to his time in the parallel universe, the alternate Jade's teachings flickering in his memory. "Where is the hooded man?" Jade demanded, stepping forward, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "This fight is between us and him. We don't have time for his lackeys." The gaunt man with hollow eyes chuckled, his bony fingers twitching as he spoke. "You'll see him soon enough, if you survive." The Wells family braced themselves as the air grew thick with tension, both sides knowing the battle was about to erupt. "Enough talk?" The muscular man growled, his dark energy crackling at his fingertips. "Let's see if you can handle what we've got." Without warning, the room exploded into chaos. The four allies charged forward with terrifying speed, and the Wells family scattered to meet them. The battle began with a violent clash, energy rippling through the hall as both sides unleashed their power. Valerie moved like a whirlwind, clashing with the woman whose eyes shimmered like mercury. Swords of pure energy flashed between them, the clang of their strikes reverberating through the chamber as they darted in and out of time's flow. Valerie's strikes were precise, but her opponent countered with a fluid grace that made her seem untouchable. Mallory faced the towering, muscle-bound warrior, his fists crackling with power as he dodged the man's brutal blows. Every strike the man landed shook the ground beneath them, but Mallory was fast, using his kismet abilities to slip through the cracks in time, avoiding the worst of the attacks while landing his own devastating blows. Jade was locked in combat with the gaunt man, their battle a deadly game of strategy and power. The gaunt man's fingers flicked, manipulating time in the room, distorting reality itself. Jade fought back, using every bit of his training to stay ahead of the man's twisted attacks, but the energy was draining, and he knew he couldn't keep it up forever. Meanwhile, Cody faced off against the fourth ally, a shadowy figure with a cruel grin who wielded dark energy like a blade. The fight between them was brutal, Cody's kismet powers clashing against the dark energy in a deadly dance. Sweat dripped down Cody's face as he pushed himself harder, faster, but his opponent was relentless. Suddenly, Cody was knocked off balance. The shadowy figure moved faster than Cody could react, sending him crashing to the ground. Cody gasped for breath, struggling to get back on his feet as the figure loomed over him, raising his dark blade for the killing blow. Time seemed to slow as the Wells family, locked in their own battles, saw what was about to happen. Valerie's eyes widened in horror, Mallory cursed under his breath, and Jade's heart lurched in his chest as he tried to move toward his son, but none of them were close enough. The dark blade descended toward Cody when, suddenly, a time portal ripped open beside him. Two figures, dressed in dark, hooded outfits reminiscent of ancient assassins, burst through the portal. The first slid across the floor in a blur of motion, raising a shield of light just in time to block the killing blow. The dark energy clashed against the shield with a violent crack, sending a shockwave through the room. Before Cody could fully process what was happening, the second figure emerged, raising his hand and firing a bolt of cosmic destruction energy at the attacker, sending the dark ally flying across the hall with a grunt of surprise. Cody's heart pounded as he looked up, stunned, at his unexpected saviors. The first figure lowered his shield, his hood falling back to reveal a familiar face, one Cody knew all too well. The alternate Jade from the parallel universe smiled down at him. "You didn't think I'd let you fall in battle a second time, did you?" Cody's eyes widened. "It's you." The second figure, stepping forward with a swagger, removed his own hood, revealing a smirk that Cody instantly recognized. "Miss me, kid?" The alternate Mallory said, his voice laced with his usual cocky charm. Cody blinked, stunned. "You, both of you." Alternate Jade reached down and pulled Cody to his feet, his grip firm but reassuring. "No time for a reunion just yet," he said, his eyes flicking toward the remaining enemies. "We've got a fight to finish." Cody nodded, his shock fading as he fell back into the rhythm of battle. "Right." With a shared look of understanding, the Wells family and their unexpected allies regrouped. The battle reignited with even more intensity, the alternate Jade and Mallory fighting alongside their counterparts, their combined strength overwhelming the hooded man's allies. Valerie and the alternate Mallory fought back-to-back, their movements synchronized, as they took down the silver-eyed woman with a coordinated flurry of strikes. Mallory and alternate Jade combined their powers, using their mastery over time to disorient the muscle-bound warrior before taking him down with a devastating double blow. Jade and Cody, side by side, faced off against the remaining two allies. The gaunt man snarled, but his twisted control over time faltered under the combined might of the Wells family and the parallel versions. His defenses crumbled, and with one final, united strike, they sent him crashing to the floor, defeated. The battle was long, brutal, and chaotic, but as the last of the hooded man's allies fell, the room finally grew still. Victory was theirs. Jade, breathing heavily, turned to the alternate Jade, their eyes locking in silent understanding. "Thank you," Jade said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. The alternate Jade smiled and gave a small nod, a silent gesture of acknowledgement, as if to say, "You're welcome." Turning to Cody, he clapped him on the shoulder with a grin. "You didn't think I'd let you face this alone, did you?" Mallory, grinning despite his exhaustion, looked at his parallel self for the first time. "So, you do have a heart in there after all." Alternate Mallory shrugged with a smirk. "What can I say? I've got a soft spot for the kid." He nodded toward Cody, who chuckled softly. For a moment, the Wells family stood in the aftermath of the battle, catching their breath. But they knew this was only the beginning. The hooded man was still out there, and the final confrontation loomed ever closer. The victory was theirs, for now, but the war was far from over.